Hello, I'm Meredith Fuller, psychologist and author. I'm talking with Hazel Edwards and Ryan Kennedy, co-authors of F2m, The Boy Within, the story of a gender transitioning journey from female to male of a young person named Sky. How did you two meet and how did you decide to write the book together?
Well, we've actually been family friends for a long time. We were doing the maths, and I think Ryan was presenting as an 11-year-old girl when I first met him, and he went to New Zealand and he came back for work to Melbourne after he had transitioned, and we both decided on the same day, because he kept a diary, that we would write a fictional work, not necessarily autobiographical. It was Ryan's first novel, so we were on a significant learning curve, and since he was in New Zealand, we wrote most of it on Skype.
Yes, it was. I felt it was more important to try to get the younger people to have access to a book like this, because they might only have access to books in the school library or in the local library, and limited to the people that they know, their family and friends. And even these days, having access to the internet is not the same as having access to people's stories and personal journeys.
A novel would also enable others to go and see a world through the eyes of that character, and by making the character 17, 18, driver's licence age, enable us to indirectly address many of these issues. Now, the character isn't necessarily Ryan, although the character has followed Ryan's medical sequence.
How has the book been received internationally?
It received a White Ravens award. Now, the White Ravens are the top young adult novels internationally in that year, and it was included in that collection, which is extremely significant. Oh, we've had some wonderful reviews and people who've been incredibly grateful. I mean, Ryan's had a lot more fan mail than I've had, of people who were so pleased that there was a story out there that they could give to others as an opening for a discussion for families who perhaps didn't understand somebody's circumstances. But we also had the situation of a teacher at a literary conference threw the book in the bin in front of me and said, "Don't read this, it's rubbish." I think that guaranteed a much wider readership of the book that day, but people's apprehensions about the subject matter has been the reason for some censorship.
Some of the reviews have been a little negative because people feel that the story itself is too positive. For some reason, people think that transgender stories need to have that aspect, but not everybody has a negative story. I know plenty of people who have transitioned happily and gone out into the world and living their lives in the new gender role that they're comfortable with, and there's nothing else to say, really. We don't all lead tragic lives that need to be sensationalised.
Brian, could you tell us a little about some of those issues of financial implications?
The financial cost, I mean, I know guys who've been on waiting lists and trying to save for 10 years now who started transitioning when I did, and it's still very hard for them just trying to get by and save so much money, thousands of dollars for an operation that they badly need. In the book, it's such a, I tried to get across that it's such a big step, but it's such a necessary step, and it's something that you're sort of hitting up against until you can get past it, in that you need to be comfortable in your own skin, and that's sort of what the driving force is. And so there really does need to be better access to surgery.
Ryan, I'd like to know more about you.
I work in IT for the Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand. I still play music, I still not as much as I'd like with the work commitments, but I still make an effort to be creative in that way. I have one cat.
Ryan, what have been the critical turning points in your life?
I guess the most critical point was when I was 27 and found out that I could transition, found out that there was such a thing as female to male transgender and that I could do that. That was fairly major. Around a year before that, I had realised that I didn't really feel like an adult. I had a lot of teenage friends, in the punk scene as I was in there, and I didn't think that there was anything strange about that. But then I started to realise, I started to look at people my age and think that they were getting on with their lives and careers and things that I had all attempted but had never really come together. So that was kind of a point where I really started looking for what might be the problem. In terms of my childhood, there weren't really, unfortunately, any critical turning points where I realised that I wanted to be male or that I was male. But I remember a lot of times when we were going to a special occasion, like a wedding or a funeral or something, and I would be forced to wear the frilly dresses, the nice dresses that my grandmother had made, and the nice female shoes, and I just saw the whole thing as horrible, and felt a kind of shame in those clothes that is quite hard to describe, and was just very confusing.
How did you go about telling your family and friends?
When I came out to my family, I had already come out to them basically 9 years earlier as a lesbian, because that was the closest thing that I could find, being a butch woman and being attracted to women. I obviously thought, well, I must be a lesbian, and so I had already had this kind of coming out experience, and so that actually made it a little bit easier for me in sort of saying, well, actually I'm transgender. And I guess people were a bit more accepting because they had already seen me as a bit different. And I think it's quite important to work out where you stand and what you're going to say, even though it feels like the ground is sort of crumbling beneath you and nothing is solid anymore, that you need to do this, and that's the important thing, and to try and get that across, because a lot of times parents will sort of think that it's a phase, or that they kind of want to talk you out of it a lot of time, but that's only because they want the best for you, and they don't want you to make a mistake that might be permanent and have repercussions. Definitely looking for a good counsellor is a vital ingredient to get that kind of support. The transition process is tough, even if it's kind of easy, even if you have the money for surgery and your family is accepting. It's still a tough process. It really strips back the layers and makes you find out who you really are, and you need support for that.
What do you fear?
I guess I fear that transgendered people aren't getting the support that they need early on in the process, and that's why it was much preferred to produce a young adult fiction book for younger people, because it's at the start of the process that is the terrible time.
What does it mean to you, being a man in our society?
As a man, I've found it much easier to get a job, really. Men and women tend to be quiet and listen to you. They give you the space to talk. Women will stop talking to allow me to talk first, which I thought was the opposite of what should happen. Men that are supposed to open the doors and stand back, but that's only if they're faced with a door. In a conversation, they'll just talk over the top. And I'm guilty of it too now, because I know that I will succeed if I've got a point to make, which is terrible. I was working in horticulture early on, in all-male crews as a woman, and I experienced the other end of that, the sexism that just took my breath away sometimes. You really had no voice. Nobody would listen to anything you said, even if it was vital to their safety. So it's been very interesting to be on the other side of the coin there. The people that I work with now didn't know me before I transitioned, so they see me as male, and that's all. And they know that I'm trans, and sometimes they ask me questions, but otherwise it's just fairly normal. And people that I have known for a long time, they find it hard to remember me as female. They remember who I was and what my name was and what I looked like, but they don't really remember me as a woman anymore. It's sort of, they kind of project the male onto the old memories, I think, from the sound of it. I did lose the ability to multitask. I found I had to start making a lot of lists of things I needed to do and working through them in order, and I have a completely different way of keeping track of where I'm up to in various tasks. That's a bit of a loss. 1 minute I could do it and the next minute I couldn't.
Tell us about your transitioning.
I bound my chest for about 3 years, and I still have lower back pain that has never really resolved itself. I have a standing desk now at work, so I stand most of the time, and that helps a lot. But that was the main reason I thought my autobiography wouldn't be particularly interesting. Actually, it would be just a daily struggle of back pain, which nobody really wants to read about. So that was the main thing for me, and that was one of the things where I really tried to fast track my surgery and asked everybody I knew if they could lend me money and things like that, because you really are sort of pushing breast tissue into where your lungs should be, and a lot of breathing issues. I would get home and just rip my binder off and lie on the floor for a bit.
How would you like people to treat you?
I guess people need to be respectful, and if you're not sure which pronoun people would like you to use, it's okay to ask, as long as you ask respectfully if they don't make it known.
And just some practical things, particularly at work, if you're transitioning at work or you've transitioned to work.
I would advise human resources departments to try to get hold of someone to do transgender training in the workplace. Making resources available, I think having a resource like f2m, The Boy Within, as a fiction book has been useful for giving out to parents and friends and allies, because it's not as full on as a technical book about transitioning, or it's not someone's specific life story that they're expecting to be the same. Being a fictional account, it can sort of suggest other things that might have happened during a transition and different pathways that people could take, and sort of hint at what the medical sequence is, not necessarily being the same for everybody. So I hope we've been able to put out there some of the options that people have.
I found in my transition phase of using the right one, I used his name, and using a name is one way of getting used to using an appropriate pronoun in a respectful way.
If love is synonymous with acceptance, is there enough love in the world for transgender people?
There is, if we can find it. My wife always says that transgender people were put on earth to teach people how to love. It's really just finding a place where we can all exist and be ourselves, and I don't really think that's too much to ask.
For the longest, well, I ain't finished. I'm devoted, and you know it, Damaged children, care homes, getting hammered in by their parents. Can you fathom or aware of the tragic shit that they're on? No matter the type, no matter the race, whether you're white or black in the face, we all want the damn same thing, for them to know what we're thinking.